Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mid-Manager program today. We are going to get started in just a second. We have a few people still joining here from our waiting room, so just while we get everyone started, we're going to have you all on mute when we're in the large room, unless you raise your hand, and then we'll unmute you and let you know. Feel free to send us any messages in the chat box. We're happy to try and troubleshoot any problems that you're having. We'll also ask you to respond to some of the questions in the chat box, and we'll be reading some questions out loud. And we'll also be using the breakout room feature. So we'll be putting you in small groups a couple different times during the training today. So we'll give everybody just another minute here. Got 4 or 5 more people joining right now in the room, and we'll get started. If you don't mind while we're waiting, if folks are interested, maybe putting your name and where you're calling in from in the chat box, just so we can see where everyone is around the world, that would be fun. And for those that are just joining, we're just having everyone say hi in the chat box and put where you're calling in from so we can see where everyone is kind of around the world. And we're going to get started in just a second. All right. Thank you all for doing that. As folks continue to join, please feel free to post where you're calling in from. My name is Sarah Benderitis, and I work for the Optical Society, and we're excited to have you joining our Career Lab program today. This program is part of the larger Advancing Mid-Managers Summit series, and it's designed for folks who are at that mid-level in their career and are looking to advance to the next level. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. We are going to be having everyone on mute while you're in the large room here, and Allison, our fabulous facilitator, who I will introduce in just a second, is running the show. We will ask you at different points to potentially respond in the chat box or raise your hand, at which point we'll unmute you so you can answer a question. Please feel free to send us a message in the chat box if you're having any issues, and we will try and troubleshoot as best we can. And we are going to be using the breakout function a couple of different times during the training. So we'll be putting you into small groups for discussion and then pulling you back again to the larger group. Again, please feel free to ask any questions that you might have in the chat box. And if you've just joined us, please feel free to list in the chat box where you're calling in from so we can see where folks are all over the world. Today we're going to be learning a little bit more about practical neuroscience for leadership. And I would like to introduce our facilitator, Allison French. Allison is the Managing Director of Alto Solutions, and she employs brain science in her approach to organizational change, communications, and leadership. As an experienced facilitator, trainer, and coach, she's helped clients within the education and government systems as well as private sectors for more than 20 years, facilitating strategic planning meetings, corporate retreats, and skill training workshops, as well as in-depth change, leadership, and team assessments, as well as strategic communication campaigns. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Allison.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everybody. I see the chats coming in and people from all over the world. I love it. It's wonderful. It must be different time zones for everybody, so appreciate for those of you who are joining really late at night or some other crazy time. Thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it. So today, as Sarah mentioned, I'm going to go ahead and get my slides shared with you here. Hopefully everyone's going to get to see these. And looks like those are showing up. So we're talking today, it's not you, it's your brain, practical neuroscience for leadership. And today I'm going to take you through some background on what is neuroscience, what does this mean, why is this relevant, and then we're going to do a little bit of a very short diagnostic that you're each going to be able to take. One thing I'll mention is there is a handout that I'm holding up, but it's a little hard to see because of the my OSA background here. If you don't have the handout, the diagnostic is in the handout. So I'm going to let everyone, if you don't have the handout, if you could raise your hand in the or put something in the chat so that we know, because we are going to be using that diagnostic in the handout. And I think, Sarah, you're able to pop that over to them if they don't have it, right? Or you can put the Google link in there.
Yes, if anyone does not have the handout, please feel free to put a message in the chat box and I'll get it sent to you.
Great, because that's one of the early things that we're going to be doing in the session. And so it's not a very complex one, but it would be good for you to have that. And then we'll really go through various domains of neuroscience and why your brain may be responding in different ways, and walk through some practical application. And you'll have an opportunity over the next 2+ hours that we're together to actually put this into practice. And we'll take a little break too at some point and make sure that we're not overwhelming your brain with a lot of information in all of this time. So again, like Sarah mentioned, if you have questions or technical issues, please put them in the chat, and Sarah will let me know if I need to pause, if I need to go slower, if there's a question that I can answer. Please feel free to ask questions as we go through. We are going to try to keep things on track, but I'm happy to address questions as well as we go through the session today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my friend, the saber-toothed tiger. Naturally, any session on neuroscience has to start with a picture of this lovely beast. So what in the world does a saber-toothed tiger have to do with our topic today? So let me take you back for a moment. So picture with me that we're back in prehistoric times. We're back in the caveman times, and you're walking around and you encounter one of my friends here, the saber-toothed tiger. Now, if you saw one of these guys, your brain is going to signal probably one of two responses: fight or flight. And most likely, you're not going to stop to think about this. You're not going to analyze it. You're just going to run. So why is it that our instinct kicks in like that? Well, it's actually due to chemicals in our brain. Back in the prehistoric days, the rational part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex right up here, wasn't fully developed. And our ancient brains released a stress hormone called cortisol that triggers the fight or flight response. It's an automatic response, and this happens because this sugary substance glucose, which I'm sure you've heard of, goes into your bloodstream and it shuts down unnecessary functions. So any sort of thinking or analysis gets completely shut down, and it gives our muscles the boost that they need to really act quickly, in this case, flee from the saber-toothed tiger. So let's flash forward to today and think about for a moment, and if you're so inclined, put in the chat what might feel like a saber-toothed tiger to you. What triggers a fight or flight or even freeze sometimes response where you're not really thinking about it consciously, but all of a sudden you're reacting to it? And Sarah, if you see a couple of responses in the chat, could you read off a few of them? What triggers you? What is a good, what is your saber-toothed tiger?
Will do. We'll give everybody just a second.
Yeah.
To respond. Someone wrote a funding agency, question mark. Deadlines.
Deadlines, yeah, for sure.
Physical safety, concerns about that. Sports, snakes, feeling
I'm
overwhelmed.
with you on the snakes, yes.
Taxation, spiders. The submit button, I like that one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Numerous paperwork.
Yeah.
A couple more spiders.
A couple more spiders.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we've got a few physical threats, some of those snakes and spiders in there, but I really like the responses like the submit button or the paperwork, or one I get a lot these days is email. Sometimes every email that we get can feel like a saber-toothed tiger. And today, our prefrontal cortex, well, that's evolved. We have it now, you know, that's way evolved since caveman times. But it's small, and it only makes up 4% of our total brain volume, and it's highly susceptible to influence. So this older ancient part of the brain is much stronger. Sometimes people liken it to a rider and an elephant, and your rational part is riding the elephant, trying to control it, whereas this bigger ancient part of your brain that's been around longer is what's giving you these reactions. And so it may not be rational to respond to a spider, even small, it probably isn't going to hurt you, but you get that response. And it's not rational to respond like that to an email, but you may get that response as well. That email comes in and it triggers you in some way that you either want to fight it, you see, oh my gosh, why is this person asking me this question again? You know, they're so obnoxious, and I start typing this message, this really nasty message back to them, and hopefully I don't hit the send button. Or in some cases, you might want to take flight, and you might say, I'm done. I'm just going to delete all these emails. I don't want to have anything else with this. I'm done. So you can respond to an email or a deadline or that submit button or whatever it is in the same way that you would respond to the saber-toothed tiger that is actually threatening you. An email may not be threatening you, but your brain thinks that it is. We get stressed, and what's happening is that this ancient part of our brain called the amygdala takes over. It hijacks our brain, hijacks our prefrontal cortex, and it releases cortisol, which is a stress hormone. So it's not you, it's your brain. It's releasing a stress hormone called cortisol, and all of a sudden you're stressed out and you're in fight or flight. So we start moving away from things that we perceive to be a threat. Whether they are a threat or not is irrelevant. We're moving away from them. It could be a physical threat, it could be mental, it could be emotional, but we're starting to move, we're starting to flee, we're starting to move away. Or we could try to fight it. Just like in the case of the saber-toothed tiger, we're resisting it in some way. Now, what each of us perceives as a threat is really related to our social experience. And so the same email that triggers one person on this Zoom may not trigger somebody else in the same way. So let's talk a little bit more about the brain and what it looks like and what it does. So your brain essentially is plastic, and not truly plastic, but this is the complex of neuroplasticity, which means our brain is constantly changing. And among the things that helps our brain to change, one thing is called mirror neurons. And what's really interesting about the concept of mirror neurons is that they essentially light up when we see an intentional action. In other words, something that's not random, something that we can ascribe meaning to. And a leading researcher in Holland who studies mirror neurons found that when we witness someone else's facial expression, often subconsciously it triggers the same for us. So, that whole story of, when you're smiling, the world smiles with you isn't entirely untrue. These mirror neurons help us to, oh, this person's smiling, they look friendly, I'm going to smile as well. But you're not actually thinking that, it just happens. Also, we found that the strongest emotion within a team can actually ripple out to drive everyone in that team to resonate with the same emotion without anyone consciously realizing it. So let me say that again and let that sink in for a minute, especially if you're a leader of a team. The strongest emotion within a team can ripple out and drive everyone to resonate with that same emotion without consciously realizing it. So if you're a team leader and you're stressed out, think about what other people might be on your team might be feeling. They might feel stressed even though they don't know why. Also, this concept of neuroplasticity, as your brain starts to receive all of these adverse threats and adverse life events, your brain starts to shrink a little bit. And so, you're not going to get to a point where your brain is completely shrunk and there's no more left. It's resilient, it comes back eventually, but in that moment, it will shrink and it creates an impact. And what's really interesting is that physical pain will create a one-time impact. You stub your toe, it hurts. Next time you stub your toe, it's going to hurt again, but you're not going to think, oh, remember that last time I stubbed my toe, it was terrible. But social pain, something happens to you socially, and then it happens again, it brings back the memories. And all of a sudden, it gets magnified, and it reminds you of what initially triggered it. So again, what you see as an adverse event may depend on how you're oriented, and we're going to introduce a model called the SCARF model. Sarah, do we have any? I see some chats coming in. Are there questions or thoughts that we want to address at this point?
We're good.
Okay. So what I'm going to ask you to do at this point is remember that diagnostic. I asked you to make sure you have the handout for. It's on the second page. It's very short. It's 10 questions. It should only take you a few moments to go through. You can get a piece of paper out and just write them on a separate piece of paper if you haven't printed out the handout. Just go through those 10 questions in the handout and basically just try to respond as truthfully as possible. Does this sound a lot like you, often like you, a little like you, or not at all like you on each of these 10 elements? And just put an X in each box. And then when you're done, turn to the next page and score yourself. And you should get a letter for a score for each of these 5 letters, S, C, A, R, and F. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to work on that. If you have questions, please chat in or raise your hand. And then when you are done, we'll move on in about 5 minutes, but I'll ask you to maybe just put your hand up when you're done in the participant bar, so that way we can see that you're ready to move on. So I'll give you about 5 minutes. If you have questions, let us know. We're working on the diagnostic.
And the link is in the chat box for those that are looking for it in case you didn't receive it along with your confirmation email for this session.
Thank you, Sarah.
For those that have might just joined us, we are taking just a couple minutes to fill out the information in the packet that was sent to you along with the confirmation email. If you are missing that packet, you can take a look in the chat box, and we've provided a link there for you. And we are filling out the diagnostic tool on page 2 of the packet. We'll come back together in just a minute to talk a little bit more about that diagnostic tool.
Got about one more minute to finish up the diagnostic and scoring. Hopefully everyone's at a spot where they've been able to do that. If you need more time, please chat in and let us know. Oh,
Allison,
I
we
see
do.
a question. Yeah, I saw that question just pop up. So
Great.
I think that's on number 9, them versus us mentality. You know, what do we really mean by that? So that's if if you're in a situation where a lot of times this manifests in a leader versus staff, or maybe different groups within an organization, where you don't see it necessarily as a team working together, but you kind of say, oh, they're out to get us, or if they win, we lose. That kind of thing, where you're sort of pitting different groups against each other. So sometimes, it's leaders versus staff. Sometimes it's different groups within the same team. Sometimes I've seen it happen with folks who work at headquarters, or who work in a field office. Oh, those field office people, they think one way, and oh, those headquarters people, they think a different way. So putting people into different buckets or different groups is this us versus them mentality. And if I saw another chat, if you're only joining via cell phone and you're not able to see the slides or do the diagnostic, I believe you can just access the worksheet later and fill it out, and then you can follow along and then sort of do it retroactively later on. All right, so I'm gonna move on in the interest of time. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to finish their diagnostic, and if not, you can kind of finish doing it while we move into the next piece. So I'm going to introduce to you what those letters stand for, and it's called the SCARF model. The SCARF represents the 5 domains of social experience that our brains treat in the same way they would treat survival issues, so those saber-toothed tigers. And much of the motivation that governs our behavior is this overarching principle of minimizing threat and maximizing reward. In 2007, the neuroscience researchers Lieberman and Eisenberger discovered that social needs are treated in much the same way that the brain treats the need for food and water. Some of you may have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This turns it on its head a little bit and says, you know what, these social needs may be just as important because they're like survival needs for us. So from this, in 2008, the neuroscientist and author David Rock developed this model called the SCARF model. He wrote this paper called A Brain-Based Model for Collaborating with and Influencing Others. And you've got, in the handout, you've got a little bit of a crib sheet on page 4 where you can take some notes if you would like, that will help you remember what each of these domains are, because that's going to come in handy as we go into our small group activities. But first, let me introduce you to what they are. So S stands for status. And status deals with a sense of personal worth and relative importance to others. So for someone who's very high in status, a status orientation, something like a title could mean a lot to that person. And I should note that every one of us has all 5 of these social domains and has some orientation on all of them, but certain domains are stronger for some of us than for others. So you'll notice that there's probably people that you know, colleagues you have, possibly yourself, who feel really good when you have a really spiffy new sounding title, or you get to do something, get some public recognition. That's a status orientation. Certainty, which is our C, concerns being able to ascertain what the future holds. Someone with a high certainty orientation needs to know what's happening next, and they can get really stressed out if things are unknown. And certainty is something that we are seeing a lot of right now, because there isn't a lot of certainty in this COVID environment. And that pertains to the whole world. It's not just, I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. There's certainly things here that may be more or less certain than in other areas, but 6 months ago here, my kids went to school in person for the last day, and I thought it would be a couple of weeks, a couple of months. I never thought that 6 months later we'd be in the same situation. And so high lack of certainty right now, high stress for a lot of people. My son, in fact, is very high on certainty as well. And he'll come into our room, and it's fun when he does this on the weekends, and he'll ask, well, what are we doing today? And I'll say, oh, well, you've got a baseball game at 9 a.m. Okay, well, what are we doing after that? I guess we'll have lunch. Well, what are we doing after that? And he'll go on and on. He'll ask all these questions because he really wants to know every step of the way. And if something doesn't happen the way we described it, he gets very upset. Well, why didn't we? Well, it rained. We couldn't do your game. Well, that's upsetting to him, even though it's out of his control. A stands for autonomy, and autonomy provides a sense of control over events and the ability to do something ourselves. And those of you with children, children tend to be very high on autonomy. I'm going to do it myself. Someone with a high autonomy orientation in the workplace is usually very uncomfortable when they're not given choices, or when they perceive that they're being micromanaged in some way. R is relatedness, and relatedness is a sense of connection and safety with others. So these people place the highest value on being part of group and building trust within that group, having a group they can really rely on. And that's another area that I see threatened a lot these days, because we have connectivity virtually, but not as much in person. And the relatedness folks are feeling pretty stressed. And fairness. Fairness, as it sounds, is a perception of fair exchanges between individuals. These people can feel really threatened when something is perceived as unfair in any sense of the word. I also have a daughter. She's 9 years old, and she has a very acute sense of fairness, and it's a perceived sense where I remember very vividly a couple of years ago, I had taken my son and his friend to an amusement park. I had pulled him out of preschool when he was still in preschool. And my daughter just said, oh my gosh, that's terrible. That's unfair. How could you do that and not take me? That's so unfair. Stomping the feet. And I said, well, I did take you when you were in preschool. We did the same exact thing. I took you out. We went to this amusement park. We spent a few days. And she couldn't relate because it was couple of years in the past for her. So for her, it was the here and now. This does not feel fair to me. So a lot of this is just a matter of perception. So when we are high on a particular domain, we tend to move away from things that threaten that area of our social experience rather. So for example, somebody who's high in autonomy is going to feel threatened if they think someone's micromanaging them, and they're going to move away from that person. And similarly, we gravitate towards things that reward the area. So again, that person high in status, you give them some public recognition or a fancy new title, and they're going to feel really good about themselves. So take a quick glance at your diagnostic, and we're gonna come back to this in a little while, but think about how accurately that represents you. Now, it's only 10 questions, so it may not represent you that accurately. You may want to change, what you think is your highest, and that's completely fine. This is just for you to do some self-assessment. But I would like you to just take one moment and circle the letter or letters where you think you have the highest orientation, whether it's based on your score or whether it's just based on what we talked about. And I'm going to go more depth into each of these domains so you can get a better sense. So if you don't even know right now, you'll maybe get a better sense as we go through these next domains. Sarah, are there any questions or anything in the chat before I move on?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Looks like we're good.
All right. All right, so I am going to illustrate some of these domains using the television show Friends that was popular here in the United States, probably abroad as well, for all I know, back in the 90s, because the characters in this show really exhibit some of these domains almost to a T. And before I show you some of these videos, it's important to remember that most of these are very relative in nature. Status in particular, very relative. And status can explain a lot of things, a lot of phenomena that we experience. It can explain why somebody might, and again, pre-COVID type stuff, but someone could queue up for hours to meet or do a book signing with a celebrity, just so you can take a selfie and post it on social media and see all of the likes come in. Oh, look, there's me and George Clooney or whoever you met. That's a status thing. That's a status orientation. Look at all these people liking my picture with this high status celebrity, right? It could also explain the concept of Schadenfreude, which is a word that basically means the good feeling of seeing somebody worse off than you, which, is sort of terrible when you think about it, but it happens. And a classic example is, you're in that elevator, you're in a rush to get somewhere, you see somebody else who's in a rush, and you're going to be late if, you don't get a moving, so you close the door on them. And you feel kind of good in a weird way that person running for the elevator didn't make the elevator. Not everybody feels that way, of course, but there is this concept called Schadenfreude that definitely explains why you have a better feeling because somebody is worse off than you. It doesn't make you a bad person, but it happens sometimes. So it also explains in a management situation why if you are being managed by somebody that is potentially younger than you, for instance, that could generate a status threat response as well. There was a movie some time ago with Dennis Quaid called In Good Company, where he was in his mid 50s, and he was, he'd worked for the same company for many years and was awaiting this promotion, and they were making a big announcement. He thought he was about to get it, and all of a sudden the company instead announced they were being acquired, and instead of him getting the promotion, this 20-something guy got it instead. And to make matters worse, this 20-something guy also started dating his daughter, which was a total mess. So that was this 20-something guy, maybe he was great. Maybe he had amazing credentials and he was, a child prodigy, who knows? But just the fact that he's perceived as lower status in terms of his age triggered the response. I'm older, I should know more. So that's another example of a status response. So on the TV show Friends, the character Monica in the maroon shirt is a very high status orientation. And so I'm going to show you a clip where she has just learned that she gives terrible massages. So watch the clip and we'll chat about it.
It's okay. You don't have to be the best at everything.
Oh my God, you don't know me at all!
Okay. You give the worst massages in the world.
I'm crying here!
Well, look, hear me out, okay? You give the best bad massages. If anybody was looking for the best bad massage, and they were thinking to themselves, who's the best at that? They'd have to go to you.
Huh. So you're saying that, like, if there was an award for the best bad massage, well, who would get that?
Oh, it would be you. You, Monica, and you'd get all the votes.
So maybe they could call the award the Monica?
Okay, so status orientation, she's found out something that she's not actually good at, and she got called out on it. Now, Chandler in the vest is her boyfriend. And can anyone, you can put it into chat, I suppose, can anyone think about what he did to sort of play to her status orientation? He knows that she's upset, that she, didn't do something well, and, she likes to do everything well and get credit for it. What did he do? What did he do to sort of play to this orientation? Any thoughts on what he did? You can either come off mute, or you can, or raise your hand rather, so Sarah can call you off mute, or you can put something in the chat. Anyone have a thought? Yeah, recast the context. Absolutely. Kind of turned it on its head a little bit, and he said, you give the best bad massages. Yeah, you'd win a prize. If there was a contest for the best bad massage, you would win it. It would be you. And of course she loved it, and she's like, oh, maybe they could call it the Monica, you know, name it after me. So he turned like I turned the worst at something being the best at the opposite. I like that. Maxime C said that. I really like that. You know, instead of being the worst, you're the best at the bad massages. So yeah, absolutely. He knew that she was high on status, and he turned it around for her. Okay, so let's move on to the next one here, which is certainty. And you're going to see the same two players. You're going to see Monica and Chandler, but you're going to see the roles reversed a little bit. In this case, you're going to see something going on with Chandler. And at this point, Monica and Chandler are actually married. They found out that they actually can't have children, so they've decided to go with a surrogate. But I want to give you a little bit of context on certainty first before we go through that, because our brains really crave certainty. Our brains are pattern recognition machines, and we're always trying to predict what's going to come next. And you can see this too in when you perform really repetitive tasks. If you're doing something that's kind of a routine for you, like let's say, you know, in a pre-COVID world, you had the same route that you drove to work all the time. And you can do it, you know, I won't say with your eyes closed because you're driving, but you could do it without thinking about it. You could listen to a podcast, you could listen to some music, you could take a phone call, and you could pay attention to those things, because the pattern is so reflective for you. You know what it is, you've done it a million times, your brain loves it because it's a pattern. There is a piece in the brain called the basal ganglia, and that stores routine. And so if you're just going along your merry way and doing the same thing over and over, you can actually free up your brain capacity to do something else. So this is where we get into trouble with multitasking, because we think, oh, we can multitask all the time, but only if you're doing something very repetitive that's muscle memory for you. Now, the road is closed one morning and you didn't realize it. And now all of a sudden your GPS is going crazy, recalculating. You have to figure out where to go now. The GPS maybe isn't sending you the right way. You don't know this route. And guess what happens? You're on that phone call, someone calls your name and you go, wait, what? Are you talking to me? Or you've completely missed what they said on your audiobook or your podcast, because your brain now can't concentrate on both things, because one of them is no longer a pattern. One of them is no longer repetitive. You actually have to think about it. So our brains really, really crave that certainty, that consistency, that repetitiveness. So in this scenario here with Chandler, he is a guy, he works with numbers. He's an analytical guy. His job is to punch in numbers and run reports based on these numbers every single day. Really high in accuracy, really high in certainty. That's what he likes, that's what he does. But in this scenario, they've just learned that the surrogate mother for their baby has actually given birth to twins, which is something completely unexpected, and he's thrown way off guard. And Monica is able to give him a little bit of a pep talk to help him embrace the uncertainty. So it's a short clip. Pay attention to Chandler's nonverbals and his expression here.
Monica, we're not ready to have 2 babies.
That doesn't matter. We have waited so long for this. I don't care if it's 2 babies. I don't care if it's 3 babies. I don't care if the entire cast of 8 is enough comes out of there. We are taking them home because they are our children.
So what did you see in Chandler's physical countenance, in his face and his body language? What did you observe? You can chat it in. Uncertainty, for sure. And I'm sorry about the Friends spoilers. I just assumed it was old enough that it wouldn't be a spoiler. So apologies on that one. Yeah, a big uh-oh. He was kind of bewildered, uncomfortable, kind of scared. You know, he really was thrown for a loop, and you could tell. But yeah, I mean, he's really not very comfortable with what's going on here. And Monica can embrace certainty a lot more readily than he can. So he was triggered by the uncertainty. All right, so I'm going to move on to next, which is autonomy. And autonomy, like we mentioned before, is being able to exert control over your own environment and having choices, being able to do things your own way. So in the show Friends, Joey is, you know, he's an actor. He doesn't have a corporate job like the rest of the group. And, you know, he just likes to do things his own way. So like, let's watch his clip and, you know, it's a humorous one, but see what you observe in this.
You know what? Make fun all you want. This is a great bag, okay? And it's as handy as it is becoming. Now, just because you don't understand something doesn't make it wrong. All right? So from now on, you guys are going to have to get used to the fact that Joey comes with a bag.
All right, so this character is very adamant that he can do things his own way. He can make these choices. This is his thing that he wants to do. Now, can you imagine if he did work in a situation where he was told, you can't have that bag? Someone tells him he can't have it. Well, now all of a sudden he's going to be triggered and he's going to feel really threatened that he made this choice. He has this bag. He likes this bag. It's defining him. And now it's something he can't do. He's going to feel really threatened. So that autonomy is if somebody's telling you, you can't do something and you feel like, wait a minute, you know, why can't I do that? It's my choice. I'm going to move on to relatedness. And relatedness is all about connection and belonging. And in the workplace and elsewhere, this is really observed by people kind of factioning off into groups, which we can do virtually just as easily as we can do in person. But relatedness isn't just about creating a group, it's about feeling safe in a group. And it's avoiding those who we might perceive as foes instead of friends. So when we meet somebody for the first time, our brain, whether this is a work situation or a social situation, our brain very, very quickly and unconsciously does a scan and categorizes friend or foe. Is this someone that I can trust? Is this someone who's trustworthy? Or is this someone who's potentially threatening? And we're doing this assessment very quickly based on factors that are unique to each and every one of us. So if somebody is perceived as a competitor, our capacity to empathize significantly drops. But if someone is perceived as like us in some way, there's some connection that we can make, then all of a sudden the sense of relatedness kicks in. And people who are very high in relatedness really have a hard time functioning without their tribe, without their group. And I see that a lot right now as we're virtual because we don't see each other face to face as much anymore. And it's more of an effort to go and make those connections. And relatedness doesn't mean extroversion either. You can be introverted, but be very high and value those relationships and those groups very much. And that makes it even harder when you're in a situation like you're in a virtual situation and you can't connect as easily. So similarly to the situations we discussed earlier about the social needs, relatedness came very, very high on the list of social needs, that the need for safe human contact can be as much of a driver as food and water for some folks. And the absence of it generates that feeling that we call loneliness. You know, we feel lonely in the absence of it. There's a biological reason for this, as all of this has a biological reason. So when we feel a sense of connection with someone, our brain is prompting our body to release the hormone oxytocin, which is the same hormone that pregnant mothers release to bond with their children. But this happens in the workplace all the time. So when you meet somebody for the first time and you realize, oh, we have kids the same age, or we went to the same college, or even we work in a similar field if you've never met them before and you're just meeting them, or we root for the same sports team, any little bit of connection generates oxytocin. So you feel that sense of relatedness with the other person, and it increases the amount of trust that you have. So in this scene, we have the character Rachel. She's the one who's covering her mouth at this point. And she's actually just learned that her dad is in the hospital. So I want you to watch what happens in this scene and how that relates to what we're talking about.
Oh my God,
Honey.
Rach.
I'm so sorry.
Is he okay?
Yeah, they said he's gonna be fine, but he's still heavily sedated.
Okay, I'm gonna come out to Long Island with you. I mean, you can't be alone right now.
No, come on, totally okay.
Sorry.
Hey. I don't need you to come. I can totally handle this on my own.
Still, let me come for me.
Okay, you really need to.
I do see a question or two in the chat that I want to get to, but let me ask you all first. What did you observe here? What her body language versus what she was saying? What did you observe?
That she's asking for help are one of the answers. The opposite of what she was saying,
Mm-hmm.
the contradiction.
Yeah.
That she doesn't actually mean what she's verbally expressing.
Yeah.
Words
Yeah.
and body language don't match.
Absolutely. Yeah, she is super high in relatedness, and she needs someone to come with her, and she doesn't want to admit it. But you can see that as soon as he says he's coming, let me come for me, so she doesn't have to admit that it's for her. But as soon as he does that, she's like, yes, definitely, please. This is something that I need. She really needs that to feel secure. Yeah, she shakes her head no, and she says she doesn't need something. There is a question about the cultural significance of the model. So I'm going to get through the last aspect, which is fairness, and then I want to address that. So I just want to let you know I did see that question in the chat. So let me get through the very last one, and then we'll address that. All right. So fairness, again, very highly based on perception, much like status. And in this scenario, we have Phoebe, the blonde, who actually is about to meet her long-lost father. And she's approaching it pretty lightly. She kind of is a happy-go-lucky person. But Ross, who you saw in the last scenario, the guy sitting next to her there, he has a very, very strong sense of fairness. And he really believes that she is taking it too lightly and that her dad did not treat her equitably. So watch what happens here.
I gotta go meet my dad.
Oh, Phoebe, what are you gonna say? Are you gonna tell him who you are?
No, not at first, because I don't want to freak him out.
What, but aren't you pissed at him? I mean, this guy abandoned you. I gotta tell you, if it were me, this guy would be in some serious physical danger. I mean, I'd walk in there, I'd be like, yo, Dad!
So you can see here that Ross is pretty angry, and it's not even his father. He's angry on behalf of his friend. He feels threatened by this. He thinks it's completely unfair and inequitable. Whereas Phoebe doesn't have as much of an orientation on fairness. She kind of feels like, well, that's just life. That's the way it is. And again, perception is really key here. Much like the other domains, it's based on perception. And there were some interesting experiments that were done about 10 years ago at Carnegie Mellon University. One of them was called the ultimatum game. And in this game, the researchers were trying to gauge the perception of what is fair. And they gave participants either $10 or $20, and asked them to share it with a colleague by giving that colleague $5. So one person had 10, one person had 20, and they each gave a colleague $5. Well, then they gauged reaction of the colleagues, and the colleagues knew how much these people originally had. So the people getting $5 knew that one person had 5 and one person had 10 and one person had 20. So the person who got $5 out of $10 had a very, very strong positive impression of their colleague. Wow, this person got $10, they gave me 5, they split it fairly. I got $5 I never would have had before. That's great. However, the person who got $5 out of $20 had a much less favorable impression because they felt like the person who had the $20 wasn't treating them fairly. This person had 20, they only gave me 5. What a cheapskate. So even though they both got $5 they had never gotten before, it was the same amount of money. The person who was getting 5 out of 20 perceived it much less favorably than the person getting 5 out of 10. And this even translates to a reward of 50 cents is actually sometimes viewed more favorably if it's out of $1 than a reward of $10 if it's out of $50. Because of the perception and because of the percentage. 50 cents is half of $1. It's an equal split. But $10 is only a fifth of 50. So that doesn't feel equal to me. Why am I not getting $25? So it's really interesting how it's based on perception more so than anything else. So I do want to get to this question because we're going to go into our breakout rooms. And I want to get to the question about the cultural aspects of it. The studies that were done, I know were primarily done in the United States. However, I also know that there were some studies done in Holland and throughout Europe. The book that David Rock wrote, I believe, is mostly based on his research in the States. That being said, you know, the brain is still the brain. And these 5 domains do and will exist in everybody, but they may manifest themselves differently across cultures. And so the folks who would ask that question, I'd love to hear, you know, if you just maybe want to chat in or put your hand up and you can come off mute for a minute. I'd love to hear your perception of it. If you are in another country, in another culture, what do these look like for you? Because these 5 social domains exist, and our brain does respond to them, but it may respond in a different way. So what are your thoughts briefly on this? So I'm trying to scroll back and remember who asked the question. I think it was Diane and Tyler. Any thoughts on that?
Tyler, you are unmuted. Go for it.
Sure, thanks. So I basically, my thought on it is, does it come down to a nature versus nurture sort of a thing? And like you say, it's part of your brain and the way that it works, but maybe, as Diane suggested, culturally, perhaps you normalize a certain level of response to these levels. So if people really care about status in your culture, you become more sensitive to it. Whereas if you're always related to everyone all the time in your whole community, and then you go somewhere where you don't have that, then you would then become more sensitive to that. Whereas you've never had to deal with that stress before that point.
Yeah. That's an excellent point. And, you know, and I saw someone typed into the chat that a culture may value one domain over the other, just like you said. I think that's really true. The thing about the SCARF model is it's not a personality assessment like you might do like a Myers-Briggs or a DISC or something like that. It is more about these domains of social experience. So if you are in a culture that value status, you may have a higher status orientation. If you're in a culture that values more relatedness, then you probably have a higher relatedness orientation. So I think that's a really good point. I think these domains exist, but depending on, you know, what your background is, they may look different, sure. And yeah, and yes, you have to be working with people from different cultures. Yeah, you've got to be sensitive to all of this. And that's why we do this, because again, it's not pinpointing someone and saying, you know, this is how, you know, this is putting a label on somebody. It's more to understand how to react to them. Like in that first example where Chandler knew Monica was really high on status, and he played to it in a way that just made him work better with her. And since he was her boyfriend, that, you know, he had a vested interest in keeping that relationship, so he was able to play to that for her. Yeah, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna put you in breakout groups, and so we're going to actually ask you to, once we get into your breakout groups, you're going to be about 5 people in a group. We're going to ask you to pick one letter of the model. You can, you know, if you talk very briefly about what letter, you know, you feel most comfortable talking about, or pick any of them. It doesn't really matter, but just pick one, S, C, A, R, or F, and then come up with some rewards that you think people in that who are high in that domain, things that would feel rewarding to them, things that they would value in real life, or just what it looks like to be high in that domain, you know, what they would value and what it would look like. So we'll do breakout groups. We'll come back, we'll do a little bit of a debrief, and then we'll take a short break before we get into the next piece of it, because I know people are probably gonna need a little stretch break in this. So any questions? We're gonna put you in breakout groups for about 15 minutes. And then we'll bring you all back. We'll give you some time updates. If you need our help, since there's so many of you, we're not going to visit proactively, but if you need help, you can signal to us and we can come, Sarah or myself can come into one of your groups and help you out. In the worksheet that you've got, the handout on page 4 has some places you can write this down if you need a place to write. But basically you're picking one domain, one letter, and then just coming up with what it looks like, you know, if you're high on that domain, and what are some things that would feel rewarding to someone high in that domain. And then we'll get a couple of people to share when we come back. So questions on this before we Let me pull up the next slide.
Gotta go meet.
Oops. Questions on this?
I'm going to send everyone to breakout rooms in just a second. I don't see any questions in the chat box, and I'll also send you all the prompt in the breakout rooms in just a second as well.
Okay, super. Yeah, so I've got it's about 10 minutes before the hour right now. So we will come back at 5 minutes after the hour, and we'll take about 50 minutes in your group. Appoint someone as your scribe to write it down, and then we'll come back as a full group, and then we'll take a short break.
Back at 5 after, correct?
Hey
Yeah.
guys.
Okay, I'm just sending that to the groups.
Yeah, looks like we still got a few folks in the main room too.
Okay, I'm gonna.
So the good thing is it's not 800 people.
Yeah, it looks like I wrote down 108 at the beginning, but it could have been different.
I've seen the highest I've seen is 118, but then we've had people come in and out at different points too. So.
Yeah, and that's yours, like when people register for these things, it's like check the box, because it's free. And this is what kills me from a business model. It's like it's free. So what are you gonna do to me, right? I'm checking the box.
Someone's asking for help, so I'm gonna join this breakout room real quick.
Okay, bye. So it's just different.
I didn't actually see that request, so I'm not sure where. Okay, sorry. Sarah saw the request for help, but it didn't pop up on my screen. Sorry, go ahead, Hannah.
Oh no, so that's all I was just saying is that. Hold on, I'm managing the booth as we're talking.
Yep.
And I have a question.
Multitasking.
Yeah, someone's asking for like prices for stuff. All right, so they're there. And so I mean, like it's all of our programs this year. It's like, it's just so hard because,
Yeah.
It's like, how would a company actually be able to even survive?
I know. It's crazy.
So it's all good. So, but I think the good news is this is really with this meeting and then just one more meeting and we're done with our big meetings for the year. So, which is really good. So we don't have to worry about that.
Good. Yeah, Sarah and I were talking a little bit about what's coming up, and yeah, and how the one in the spring is still scheduled for in person. So we'll see how what happens there.
Yeah, it's we'll see what really goes on, right? With what is the world really going to look like? I am concerned that I think we still got a while to go.
Yeah.
I think the first half of next year is going to be very similar to this year. I don't think things will change until really afterwards. It's going to be a while.
Hello.
Hi,
Hey.
Sarah. I didn't get a notification for help. Is it because I'm not a host or?
Probably. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just going through, and any breakout rooms that like only have one person, I'm moving them into other rooms and stuff right now.
Thank you.
Probably because I did it, you probably won't see any of the notifications. There were only 2 people in the room, and their audio wasn't working for one of them. So I was like, I'll just move you all into other rooms, and sorry, your audio's not working. You'll just have to listen. So
yeah, that's fine.
You know, hey
maybe,
Sarah. Oh, sorry.
oh no, I was just gonna say in about a minute, can we do a 5-minute warning?
Mhm.
Okay.
Hey Sarah, quick question for you.
Yep.
You know, Albert's at the booth, right?
Mhm.
But you know, his name's not popping up, and he's emailing that he's there. And
Have you refreshed your screen?
So how do I refresh my screen?
Just do the regular refresh, like on your web browser, because depending on, and if you're not logged in as the chat in the chat, then you probably won't see it either.
Yeah, I don't see. So I should just you said refresh like I would just normally refresh.
Yeah. Let's see here. Yeah, I don't see him either.
And I'm chatting with him in a private conversation right now, so it's like so weird because I'm like, I don't see you.
Yeah, I would say he probably needs to find what do you call it? Either submit a help desk ticket or chat like Mary directly and say, I'm not appearing to, in the chat, even though I'm having, one-on-one chats right now with Hanara on the chat, but my name's not appearing because Barbara was having the same issue earlier, and I think sometimes the accounts aren't connected the right way, or it could just be an error on the page.
Okay, so I'm gonna just email web desk and Mary.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna send a 5-minute warning.
You're in the chat room, but not appearing available. Let them know.
Yeah, and the rest of the folks that are probably just kind of here in this main room are probably just listening in and have not actually bumped to a breakout room, but that's okay.
That's fine.
I moved people around, so most of the groups have at least 2 or 3, if not 5. So I tried to make sure no groups just had 2. I tried to move people.
Oh, fun, fun, fun. So Sarah, is Patrick going into the office tomorrow?
Yep.
Oh, how does that feel with you?
It'll be
I know you're going to go every Tuesday, but I'm like, oh God, you must be going nuts.
Yeah, Riley, the little one, is starting pre-K tomorrow online as well. So we'll see. Oops, someone's asking me for help. Hang on a second. I'm going to go jump in there. Also, I have no idea what this does to the recording. I mean, I know it's still recording, but I'll be curious to see what it does. Like when I leave for a breakout room, I'm assuming it's still just filming the main room, but who knows?
Well, hopefully we can edit what we just said.
Oh yeah, we can. Yeah. Well, we did this for the executive presence one too, and we just clipped it basically when we were said, okay, we're going to do small group discussion now, and then it just went to, and we're back, kind of thing.
That's funny. Alrighty.
Okay, we got a couple minutes.
Yeah.
No, we got a little more than that. I goofed on the time. I just realized I gave them less time. I goofed because I was looking at my original notes.
Hey,
And oh well, we can give them a few extra minutes.
Hey.
I just realized that because I was looking back at my notes instead of at what my actual timer. So. Hey, Sarah. Oh, you're on mute, and I just realized I looked at my notes instead of at my I gave you I said the 5-minute warning, and then I was like, oh my gosh, I was looking at off my notes and not off when we actually. So we still technically have 4 minutes, but I'm gonna give them the extra couple of minutes, and then
Okay.
just we can do like a 2-minute warning in a minute or two. But
Sounds perfect. We had 2 more people come in, so I'm just going to send them to rooms quickly.
Okay.
They can join the discussion. Yeah, we had one person having technical issues with they can't hear anything.
oh,
And I can't seem to like mute or unmute them from my side, so I think it's something on their side. So I was trying to chat with them to see if we could get it figured out, but sometimes there's just tech issues. They're having a good conversation though, from what I overheard.
good. Yeah, this is good fodder for conversation, but yeah. And I put the break idea in too because I was thinking, and we didn't talk about it, but I think I just want to give them like a 5-minute if they need to stretch or go to the bathroom or anything.
Sure.
Just because I feel like 2.5, I think 2 hours we could get away with, but 2.5 starts to get a little long for sitting in the same spot on a Zoom.
Yep.
So that's why I thought, tomorrow I don't think I'm going to do it, but today I think just give them a 5-minute stretch break.
Okay.
And they can just tell them to keep their Zoom on and just, turn their video off if they're gonna, if they have video on or whatever.
Sounds great.
There's a question I see in the chat, and I'm not sure I understand the question. I don't want to not address it. So maybe it's the last thing in the chat. It's something about the model changing with age. Yeah.
I think it's the idea because someone asked earlier more about triggers, if triggers can change throughout your life. And I said, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Or with the situation. And I'm assuming it's that kind of thing. Like if you kept taking this diagnostic, would you have one of a more prominent number or a letter?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Age. I think honestly, it's probably more situation than age.
I agree. Yep.
That's my 2 cents on it. So
I completely agree. So yeah. Well, why don't we give them like a 1-minute warning, and then we'll bring them back.
Cool. Will do. Okay. Oh.
All right.
I'm going to close all the rooms. I think it gives like another 30 seconds after that to let everybody go back.
Yeah, we got.
Oh, it gives them a minute. So that's good to know.
Okay, perfect. Okay, just do that. Yeah.
All right, everyone should be coming back into the main room now. We should have folks back in just a second. We're closing all the breakout rooms down now. Give everybody just another second to come back in. Okay, it looks like we are all out, Allison.
Okay, super. Well, great. Thanks, everyone. I realize that was not a ton of time to really talk about this, but hopefully we have some good ideas. I did see in the chat a question right before we went into the breakouts, and I want to make sure I understand it. So I see a question here about does the model change with age? And if I've misinterpreted this, please let me know. I think Philip had asked this. So my interpretation of your question is that you're asking if it could change for you, as you change in age. And one of the things I would say is it certainly can, because it's not a personality assessment. I would say it's more likely that the situation changes where your orientation is than your age, but your age could play a factor in it for sure. But I think, and again, it's like the culture idea that if you're, exposed to something or even a corporate culture that is very high on autonomy and you're used to doing things one way, and then you're thrust or there's an acquisition and the new company comes in and all of a sudden you have to report everything that you're doing to a manager. Well, now you're really high in autonomy because you've been used to that. And so that may be something that, once you get used to this other new, environment, maybe it could change for you. It's hard to say. Does that answer your question, or was there a different question you had? Feel free to, Philip, take yourself off mute if I didn't answer your question. Or maybe chat in if I did. All right, I'm going to move on, but if you have a follow-up to that, please just put it in the chat, or raise your hand and we can get to you. I do want to take a few minutes to do a little bit of debriefing from some of the groups. We won't have time to get to every group. We've got a lot of participants, but I would love for some people to volunteer. And what I'll do is I'd like to get one volunteer group for each of our letters. So if you chose the letter S, would you be willing to volunteer? Raise your hand, or let Sarah know, type in that your group did S, and let's get some of your takeaways, some of the things you came up with, some of the rewards that you would value, and how this would look in the workplace.
Great. If folks could just raise their hand and I'll unmute you.
So who did S? Or did everyone shy away from S? Nobody took S? Or nobody wants to admit? Anyone here wanna take a stab at what might be a value, or a good reward for someone who might have a high S orientation?
A title.
It's because I said that 3 times,
Yeah,
right?
well, exactly, right. Or nice office, right?
A nice office, a title, yeah, something they can show off. Yeah, that corner office that can bring their clients and be like, look at this great view I've got. Sure, that could feel like a reward, absolutely. A parking space, yeah, somewhere you can park your nice fancy car in your prominent parking space. Yeah, that would appeal. Yep. Anything else you can think of? Yeah, public thank you or a certificate, especially one that they can hang up or they can present, that's presented to them publicly. Absolutely. Yep. Good ideas. Sure. Expensive equipment in your lab, expensive equipment you can show off to other people. Business cards with your titles on them. Yeah, those are all great ideas. Admire, respect. Here comes everything. All right. Yeah. Great. All right, so I guess nobody as a breakout group did the S, but did anybody as a breakout group do C? Someone's got to have done C, because nobody did S.
Okay, Tyler, I'm going to unmute you.
Okay, so we did certainty, And interestingly, we actually found that it could lead to autonomy. So if you find that you want to have such confidence and certainty in what's going to happen that you try and take over control of what's going to happen, these people are perhaps confident because they're sure this is the way it's going to be. Because if that's not the way it's going to be, then that's terrible. That's the end of the world. They like to have a plan instead of just going with the flow. So planning ahead, maybe meal preps, that sort of thing. And they have concerns when things do not go to plan. It can be rewarding to them if you provide a plan, such as an agenda or a calendar, that sort of thing, and making sure that we stick to the plan. And maybe furthermore, if you identify and take responsibility for times when things do not go according to plan, they would really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, owning up to it if it doesn't go to plan, hey, it's, this is, or explaining maybe why, giving them that sense of certainty back a little bit, that yes, it didn't go to plan, but I'm going to acknowledge it, and I'm going to maybe explain why it didn't go according to plan, and maybe even figure out ways we can improve it for next time. So yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. What about A? Anybody do A? Autonomy. I see a couple of, I see Damon's raising his hand. Yeah.
Yeah, we were big autonomy.
Big autonomy.
So yeah, the examples that we had was a person who liked to work all alone in the lab, for one thing. There was my brother who had to disinfect his own foot when he was 3 years old at the hospital. He wouldn't let anybody else do it. And a boss who always needs to be right. And then there was a person who just felt cornered at an exam, feeling like they were being put on the spot. And do you want solutions as well that people pointed at?
Sure, yeah, why not?
So for the person who wants to work all alone in the lab, the idea there was if you could sell them the idea of teamwork, that there was some advantage to working as a team instead of just working yourself, that person was going to end up with something better if they worked with everybody else, if they gave up a little bit of that autonomy. And I really liked with the person who was stuck in the exam, he said he just told his friend, go do something you want to do, go for a walk or something, you have some sense of control over this. And then with the boss, it was circle around until they think it's their idea.
Yeah, well, that works a lot. If you can figure out a way to make it feel like it's their idea, even though it's yours, and maybe you're not high in autonomy, so you don't care as much. And yeah, absolutely. Great ideas. And I was thinking too, the connection between the certainty and autonomy, I think it was Tyler that brought that up as well. This idea of, especially right now, everything is so uncertain, if you also like to have that sense of being in control of the situation, not only knowing, but also being in control, you may not know what's going to happen, but you can give yourself that autonomy and be in control. You don't want to be low on all these domains, because then you're feeling threatened everywhere. So if you can give yourself a little bit of autonomy, go do something you want to do, right? And I think about, a lot of things that are happening now where I don't have as much control over things as I used to. And I have kids who are in school, and that's completely out of my control, even more so now than ever before. But, what are some of the things I can do? Well, maybe I can, carve out some time in my schedule to work with them, or maybe I can get them a tutor, or maybe, there's things that I know I can do regardless of what else is going on with my school district or anything else. I can still, and you feel a little bit better when you can kind of say, all right, there's this one thing that I did because I decided to do it. It makes you feel a little bit better about life in general. So, all right. So who are my R's? Who did R? Our relatedness folks. Safety in groups.
Feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you if you'd like to talk.
Getting the sense we had a whole lot of certainty and autonomy folks in this group. So. Okay, yeah, so somebody chatted in that there were a couple people for R. Do you have any ideas on R? What feels like a reward for someone who's highly oriented toward relatedness? I think that was Tony. You chatted that in that you had some R folks in the group. Or anybody?
Yeah, hello.
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 Yeah. So we said that group activities can be a good thing to create relatedness to others. Something like to organize a hike or a dinner.
Yeah, absolutely.
What
Yeah, some
else?
sort of activity.
What else? Yes, something like to create a good group atmosphere for a team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, having that good atmosphere where everybody feels comfortable being together.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Even if it's virtual, you can still do that.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get to some more of these after our short break. Some other strategies you can use. So let's wrap it up with F, fairness. Who took F? F for fairness. Anybody work on that one in your group?
Hang on one second, I'll unmute. Lisa, I'm going to unmute you. Go for it.
Okay. Hi. So our group had fairness, and we talked about a couple different things that we thought were rewards for fairness. Two of them are kind of related. One is acknowledgement or recognition of a contribution. And then the other ones were kind of related to money. So one would be if there were bonuses being given out, equal shares of the bonus, or if there were raises being given out, that it was equal and fair when people were getting promotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, there's this idea of being, you know, it doesn't have to be public recognition, but just being recognized and appreciated, and the contribution being recognized that you did something, and you know, you weren't just sitting on the sidelines, for sure. And the money thing is tough, especially if there's, and we'll talk about this a little bit, especially if there's different divisions and there's a different pay structure. You know, how can you think about the idea of fairness, and that gets a little bit dicey sometimes, but again, it's this perception, right? Maybe one group isn't making as much, but maybe they have a more flexible schedule or something else that they value. But how do you make it fair? Now, the perception, the fair assignment of work and responsibilities. Yeah, that's another one that just came in on the chat. Yeah, and again, it's this perception of, you know, hey, why am I doing all this and this other person isn't? And is that the full picture too? And if it isn't, how do you make it the full picture? Yeah, acknowledgement, credit, bonuses, and transparency. The communication aspect of it is really important for fairness. Great. Okay, I have 20 minutes after the hour at this point. I just want to give you about a 5-minute stretch break. If you need to get some water, use the facilities, just get up and stretch. I know 2.5 hours is a long time in training, especially virtually. So take 5 minutes. You don't need to leave. Please don't leave the Zoom. Stay on the Zoom, but feel free to just, if you want to turn off your video, and we'll resume in 5 minutes at East Coast time, 4:25. And we will see you again in 5 minutes, and we will resume with some strategies for application. We're going to get started again. It's about 25 after the hour. And we're back. Yes. So I want to talk a little bit about strategies for application. We already talked about this a little bit in our debriefs, and we're going to go a little bit deeper into this so you can end the day today with a tool that you can use as you go back into the workplace. So now that we know the domains of the SCARF model, we can apply it to both our personal and our professional lives. And by understanding what moves people away from us or what people perceive as a social threat, and what moves people towards us, or what they perceive as a reward on each of those 5 domains, we can sort of start to craft strategies as we work with people, if we onboard new employees, to support our peers and our colleagues or team members or people that work for us, to help motivate them, to help develop them. And also, working upwards to our leaders as well. The most important thing to note is that it's not a one-size-fits-all, and I think everybody sort of realizes that as they're thinking about themselves. This is a very introspective type of a class and type of work that you would do, because everybody naturally thinks about their own tendencies. And again, it's situational. It can change over time. Everybody does have some orientation towards all 5 of these domains. So, this isn't to say that you are a S or you are an R. That's not how it works necessarily. It's just to think about what triggers you and what feels like a threat to you, just like that saber-toothed tiger we talked about in the beginning. So what we want to do is we want to sort of go through and look at what this could look like and what this means for people that you may encounter in your personal and your professional lives. A lot of times, we're really quick, especially in the workplace, to offer a suggestion that we think is a very commonly held belief or a reward, so to speak, that isn't always a reward for everyone, doesn't feel like a reward for everyone. And so, for instance, more flex time might feel really good to someone who has a very high autonomy orientation and they want to have control over their schedule, but it may not feel as good to someone who needs more structure or more certainty, or it may not feel as good to someone who is higher in relatedness and wants to have more time to bond with the team. So you really want to make sure that you're dangling the appropriate carrot, so to speak. And you might want to suggest someone gets a promotion or a new title. And again, that's good for status, may not be good for others. So let's walk through them again. And you'll see some things in here that you've already probably come up with in your small groups. And I'm going to give you a little bit more in depth on each of these and what could move people away, what could move people toward, what's perceived as a threat versus a reward for each of these social domains. So again, starting with status. So when someone is approached with the seemingly innocent, "Can I offer you some feedback?" question, their brains enter fight or flight. And this happens to most people, regardless of how high you might be on status. David Rock, who came up with this model, likened hearing this phrase to the same reaction that you would have physiologically is if you were in a dark alley at night and you heard fast footsteps behind you. Your heart rate quickens, your breath starts to come faster, and you go into reactionary mode almost immediately. Some people less so than others, but this question in and of itself can be a trigger, and it helps explain why performance reviews and corrective feedback can sometimes be very deadly. They're actually generating huge threats to status, and as a result, they're actually ineffective at creating behavioral change. So a better solution, there's several better solutions in this, and one is to have some self-initiated feedback. Have people assess themselves on what they think is important, and then augment that with some positive feedback, which is shown to actually release dopamine, which is the reward hormone in the brain. So you're getting people to come up with what's important to them, and then you're telling them why they're good in that area that's already important to them. Then you can issue some of the redirecting feedback. But first you want to look at that positive feedback that's paid towards something that is important to them or an area that they're trying to improve. So if there's something that they're working on or a big success that they've had, positive feedback in those areas goes a really long way. So that idea of, can I offer you some feedback? There may be better ways to get at that than just putting that question out there. It may be more of a process. It may, you want it to feel less like you're giving advice or instructions than you're a partner helping somebody who's identified an area that they want to work on and figuring out what is that area. Just like with Monica and Chandler, he was able to twist it a little bit to say, well, you give the best bad massages, even though they're bad massages, they're the best, and he's able to sort of play to her a little bit. Other threats for someone high in status, we've mentioned this multiple times, a lower title. Sometimes we can't get away from that in the corporate hierarchy, but sometimes we can, and if we know someone's really high in status, maybe it's not that big a deal to give them a title that sounds a little bit more a little bit higher than it is, or not take something away from them that they perceive as a higher title. Again, perception is the key, whether it's, I think, I feel like my title doesn't really say what I do or how important I am, or someone is less qualified but is in a higher position than I am. Anything that suggests that this person is somehow less than or ineffective in any way, this creates a status threat. So how do you counter that? You counter that with the positive feedback. You pay attention towards the successes. You pay attention towards the improvement that they've identified they want to work on. You use public recognition. And this idea of besting oneself is really important to someone who has a very high status orientation. They like to beat themselves at their own best time at a task or at a sport, so making it like a competition. I have a lot of friends who are runners and they're always trying to get their personal best, their personal record. That's something that's very attractive to somebody who has a high status orientation. You can use this with kids as well. Playing to their status need. Treat them like they're older than they are. They love that, and so giving them that extra responsibility makes them feel like they're plays to their status need and makes them feel like they're something a little bit better than they are. And that definitely helps them do the things that you ultimately want them to do. Oh, you're old enough now to load the dishwasher for me. Oh, really? Oh, yeah. You're, I wouldn't have given that responsibility to you until you were at least 12 years old, but you're 6, go for it, So there's a way to do that. There's a way to use that in personal as well as professional life. Certainty. Anytime that there is a lack of clarity in expectations, timelines, objectives, positions, any type of change, lots of change going on right now, a threat reaction can occur for those high uncertainty. And in a work environment, the focus should really be on transparency to reduce the uncertainty. Sometimes we aren't certain about things. If we can give clear expectations for job performance and desired outcomes, if we can give precise and agreed upon timelines, and that's something that you work with your team to come up with, so they're part of the process. The more access to information you can provide, the more advance notice on meetings, the length of meetings, the objectives of the meetings. How many times have we been in a meeting? Show of hands, how many times have you been in a meeting with no agenda and you feel like you're spinning, you're going nowhere, it's pointless, it's a waste of your time, and there's no certainty, and it's frustrating as all heck. Why are we even bothering? This is a waste of time. So the more you can do those kinds of things, and the more you can break down the complex projects into smaller steps and show impacts, that helps too, especially in cases where maybe we don't have all the information we need. We don't have all the certainty. We can't give an answer. So can we break it down? Can we take a chunk of it? Can we make it smaller? Sometimes things do change. Sometimes expectations change, or position descriptions and responsibilities do change. These are all perceived as threats. So either keep them stable or provide the transparency into why they are changing. What's the business reason? What's the impact? How can the other person be involved? That helps reduce the threat of uncertainty. So anything you can do on that area will actually help to motivate and move people towards a common goal, especially if they have a very high certainty orientation. So autonomy, let's talk about autonomy here. The classic one, of course, is being micromanaged or feeling like you're being micromanaged. And what's really interesting here is that somebody who is a very high autonomy orientation might feel micromanaged way more easily than someone who is very high in relatedness. Someone high in relatedness might actually welcome more of a personal touch, more of a hand-holding, more of a, oh, let me see, let's have checkpoints, let's have check-ins, let's see how we're doing. This is why this is not a one-size-fits-all, because if I say, all right, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure nobody feels micromanaged in any way, well, you may threaten your relatedness people because they may want that connection and they're not getting it. So really knowing who you're working with, and this is sort of leading us up to the next part of this workshop. Schedules that are set in stone and are not flexible. We've learned a lot about flexibility lately with, you know, the impacts of COVID worldwide, with what's happened with kids in school, what's happened with caregivers, what's happened with teachers. I mean, in general, we as a world have had to get a little bit more creative and a little bit more flexible. You know, sometimes our schedules can't be set in stone. I was in a meeting just yesterday, on Friday, with a group, and they all had young children in school doing it virtually, and the leader of the group basically said, look, my husband and I are splitting it up, and I'm taking 8 to 2 days a week, and I'm going to be offline. I'm not working during that time, but I'm making up the extra hours. And since she was the supervisor, she had, you know, the autonomy to do that. But then she gave that autonomy to everyone else in the group and said, just let me know what your schedule is going to look like so we have coverage. And it made everyone feel so much better. And there's such positive affect in that group because they know that they can do what they need to do in their personal life and still get all of their work done by being able to be flexible with their schedule. So if there are ways to allow people to set up their own schedule, their own workflow, their own environment, you know, that really helps a lot. And the language of choice is really important too. Even if you're not really giving a choice, using language that implies that you're giving a choice can help. My classic example is with my kids again. They have to eat a vegetable at dinner and they are not vegetable eaters. They don't like their vegetables, but I'm not going to force them to eat the broccoli every night. I'm going to say to them, okay, I have 2 choices for you. I have broccoli and I have baby carrots. Which would you prefer? Baby carrots it is. And now they have to eat those, but they've chosen it. They've used their autonomy and they've chosen it. And so I have a lot more leverage over them to say, well, you didn't eat it, but they chose it. I didn't make them, you know, I didn't make them eat it. And that works in the work environment as well. Instead of, you know, if you have options and somebody comes up with something that doesn't make a lot of sense, you could say, well, here are 2 options that I think would work out well. Which do you think would work the best? So giving a choice out of some preconceived notions still gives the language of choice. So that's something else. Interestingly, you'll see on this list of threats working in a group. Working in a group can be threatening to someone high in autonomy, whereas working in a group can be very rewarding to someone high in relatedness. So that's something to think about as well when you think about the people that you work with, the people that you interact with. What feels like a reward to one may not feel like a reward to someone else, may feel like a threat. So we'll move on to relatedness. And here, of course, you know, having those small learning groups, the opportunities for networking and mentoring and coaching and social activities, all of those kinds of things can feel like rewards to people who are high in relatedness. And it's interesting too, because as organizations grow, and now it's especially interesting as organizations grow, because in a lot of cases, people are being onboarded virtually and never having physically met face-to-face with the people they're working with. So new employees are being added into existing groups. And what's really critical in any situation, especially virtually, is that ample socialization begins during that onboarding process and continues as part of the day-to-day operations. So, you know, when coworkers are no longer in the same office, that can be a threat to relatedness, remote employees, or all of us being remote and doing everything virtual. So leaders need to be careful. And this is where someone asked me before about us versus them. There was a time where there were some remote employees and then there were some in the office, and we're getting back towards that now, especially, you know, even in the US, we have some people who are going back in, and then there's some people who are just staying remote because they need to balance their work, their life, their families. Is there an us versus them mentality? Oh, we're better because we're in the office every day, and they're, you know, they're working from home. I don't know, but that's something to be very, very mindful about. It's very easy to create that mentality inadvertently and to promote that. So that cultural connection really needs to start at the top. So if you're leading a team, how do you make it inclusive? And social events, not just for the sake of social events, but ones that make sense for the group and the preferences of the group. Again, it's not just having a group, it's feeling safe within the group. And it's feeling like, you know, when you get together, you can say what you want to say and not be judged, or you can have a good time with these people and let down your guard a little bit. So what are some of the things you may need to do? Some polling and ask around and figure out what feels comfortable. When we were all together in person, did everyone really want a happy hour after hours? Or maybe it's better to do a lunch and learn in person, you know, where people are doing it during the regular working hours. So that's something else to think about. And, you know, the video conferencing may seem like an odd addition to the list of rewards, but the reason that it's here is because, especially now, since we are so virtual, it really helps when people can actually see their coworkers on a call. It really increases the connection and boosts the oxytocin when you see somebody. And now, you know, we're seeing people's homes, we're seeing their backgrounds, we're seeing, oh, look, there's a sticker, a poster, or a diploma, or something in the background that, hey, that's my college too. And it creates a little bit more of a connection. So having the actual physical ability to see someone and see their face and, you know, make virtual eye contact and see that they're smiling is much better for connection and relatedness than simply hearing a voice on a phone or exchanging an email. And then finally, for fairness, again, this perception is really huge. And this idea, and some of you brought this up after our debriefs, you know, if one group gets a reward and another group doesn't, or if it's so different, it's such a big differential, and people observe this, then that's going to be a threat to them. That's going to be a huge threat for the people who aren't getting what the other group is getting. You know, different rules, different rewards, different punishments, you know, and when I say punishment, I don't mean that as literally, but, you know, if you don't finish this project, you know, what might happen to you. So what's the culture in the organization, and are there different cultures that work differently? It really is a very, very difficult domain to tackle in the workplace because it's based on perception, and more so than any of the others. You know, operational structures could be in place and could just be perceived as unfair. Rewards, operational rules, etc. Very, very challenging situation. And again, the increased transparency, communication, involvement are the best ways to counter this. Clear expectations, rules and guidelines, leaders who walk the talk, who don't just say something, but actually follow through on what they say is really important. And if there is a process that seems unfair, having the ability to have the dialogue and understand why it might be, and is there a way to right the ship? And then this one at the bottom under rewards might seem kind of out of place, the donating time to charity work, but it's actually something that is very motivating to someone with a high fairness orientation, because very often someone with a high fairness orientation is also oriented very fairly globally as well. And so when they see injustice, they want to fix it, or when they see a disparity that, you know, people don't have enough food in their town or something, they want to fix that because they're very high on fairness in their personal lives. And so giving people an opportunity to give back to others actually decreases the unfairness that others would experience and boosts their own reward levels. So that's something that is a little bit of an out of the box thinking, but sometimes helps give a reward to someone who has a very high fairness orientation. And fairness is very connected to some of the others, certainty, of course, as well as relatedness. And so when someone is, we perceive someone as being fair, those oxytocin levels increase, the sense of trust increases, we can feel more related to them as well. And then with the increased transparency, we're also getting increased certainty. So these are all sort of working in tandem with each other. So let me pause for a moment and see if you have questions, comments, thoughts around these strategies for application. And you can raise your hand or chat in any questions you might have before we move into our next exercise. Anyone have questions or thoughts around this?
Someone wrote, I have a question about what score determines what is high in each orientation.
And I see two. I also see optimum composition of a team. So yeah, I mean, so it's relative. So as far as the, what score determines what's high in each orientation, the diagnostic you took is something I put together. It's not that highly scientific. I will be the first to admit. It's more of a pulse point for you, and it's also why I said in the beginning that if you came up, oh, I have this high score on certainty, but I don't feel like that's me, then it's really more about how you feel as I'm going through these things, and what sounds most like you. Where do you feel like you're being threatened or rewarded socially? So if you perceive yourself to be someone who, and there's no sort of definitive answer on this, it's all sort of a sliding scale because we all have all of these orientations to a certain extent. But if you are the kind of person who, if you remotely perceive that you're being micromanaged at all, and someone else says that person's not micromanaging us, and you say, oh yes they are, you're probably very high in autonomy. If you're the kind of person who gets very stressed out if you don't know what's happening next, or you are having trouble handling change, or you have a schedule and then someone throws a monkey wrench into it at the last minute, then you're probably high uncertainty. It's not really a black and white kind of thing where oh, you're one or the other. It's more about understanding where your leaning is. So I'm not going to give a number on that, but it's more about sort of self-reflection and understanding what triggers you, where do you stop thinking rationally and go into fight or flight. I see some other questions coming in. So gosh, a lot of questions. So there's composition of the team, and that's something that a lot of times you don't really have control over. And again, this isn't a personality assessment, so it's not like a DISC or a Myers-Briggs where you could say, oh, I really want to a lot of I's because they're really inspiring and they work well together. And I also want a lot of S's, because they're steady. And a lot of times you don't have control over the team. The important part of this is not about how you compose your team. And this is going to be our next activity as well. So this is a good segue, but I want to address some of these sessions, or some of these questions rather. The idea is knowing who these people are on your team, understanding where they might be high, and then crafting strategies to work with them. So if I have someone on my team who gets their nose out of joint anytime they think something is unfair, well, guess what? They're really high in fairness. So what do I need to do? I need to be really transparent with them. I need to give them real clear expectations. I need to say what I do what I say what I do, and not say one thing and do something else with them. So we're going to give you an activity to work on for the rest of the remainder of the time before we come back and debrief to end the class, where you can actually go and think about people that you work with on your teams. It could be in your personal life, it could be at work, and try to figure out what domain they're highest in and what you will do to have a better working relationship with them, to better motivate them, to better work cohesively with them. So can you have the same score for 2 different domains? Absolutely, yes, you can. And again, that diagnostic is just a quick and dirty, just to get a pulse. You may be very high in multiple things. You may be high in all of these things, to be completely honest. So that's an absolute yes. My goodness, there's a couple of, Sarah, do you have the order of the questions here? Maybe we can take a couple more and then save the
Sure.
rest for after the activity.
How about this one? Let's see here. There are some elements that are in contradiction among the domains. So how might you work to balance some of those, whether, I'm not sure if they're thinking about for themselves or a team, but thinking about if one person likes a lot of management, another person likes a lot of autonomy, how do you work within something like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it may even be a conflict in yourself situationally. You may be in one situation where, you really love working in groups. Maybe in your personal life, you really love, being in your church group or being on the PTA or whatever it might be. But you really don't want to do it at work, and so you may even have different different ways of looking at it even within yourself. And it's a high likelihood that you'll have somebody on your team who loves to work in a group, and you'll have somebody on your team who loves autonomy and feels threatened by working in a group. So if you're the manager of that team, what do you do? It's a really good question, and it's something that I would encourage you to really, and again, this next exercise is going to help you with this a little bit. I'm going to give you a tool to really think through, and this goes to another question of, how do you figure it out? You observe their behaviors. You think about what we talked about, and I think they're getting a copy of the PDF of this, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And so that'll be a little cheat sheet for you as well. So you can observe the behaviors of the folks that you come into contact with day to day and say, oh, what are they doing? Am I doing, is something happening with them that's making them sort of move away or gravitate towards me? And then you can sort of start to guess, educated guesses on, where they have a high orientation. And then you can start to craft your strategies. You can look at your team and say, oh, I have, 2 people who seem very high on relatedness, one who seems high on fairness, and one who seems high on autonomy. Now what do I need to do? Maybe there's an opportunity for the relatedness people to work together on something. You give the autonomous person a separate task that sort of plugs in, and you show them how it plugs in, but they get to work on it on their own. You give the fairness person an opportunity to, pick what they want so it's fair, and you're not assigning it. There's lots of different ways to do it, but it's going to depend on your individual team and even how much you think they're moving in one direction or another. And again, I think this next worksheet will help you think through some of that. So I think let's actually move into the exercise, and then we'll have some more time at the end for questions, because I want to give you that opportunity to really think through it and have a takeaway for yourself. So this is using it in your organization. So on the last 2 pages of your handout, you have these instructions, and then you have a blank table. And in the table, you can write down, and you don't have to put their names if you don't want to, but everybody here is, working from their own place right now, so nobody's going to see your paper necessarily. You can put the names of people that you work with. Indicate which domain you think is the most prominent. Educated guess based on what we talked about. Do they gravitate towards, getting recognition in public? Do they bristle if there's a hint of micromanagement? What domain or domains could they be in? Put that letter or letters in that second column, and then that evidence in the third column. What have you seen that leads you to believe that? So you're kind of going back and forth. Well, I think they're enough because of this. And again, it's not that that's the only thing that defines them. It's just that they're high in that area. And then you want to look at what you think could be a threat or a motivator to them, and think specifically about interactions that you have with them. What are things that you might do with this person that could feel like a threat to them based on the domains that they're highest in? And how could you use this to motivate them in some way? Maybe there's something you want them to do. Maybe you want their help with something. How could you use it to motivate them or have a better relationship with them? That would go in the last column. So what I'd like to do at this time, I want to give everybody a few minutes to work on this individually. Just to get started, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes individually, like we did with the diagnostic, just to start jotting down your ideas. And then we're going to put you in breakout groups of about 4 people where you can exchange ideas and talk to each other. And we'll give you about 15 minutes in those groups together so you can exchange ideas. You're not going to get the table 100% completed. This is just a starting point, and you can take this with you and you can make copies of it and you can use it, but it'll give you an opportunity to bounce ideas off of other folks. And even if you only put one person down in this worksheet, that's fine. So questions on what we're doing, the instructions are on the screen. I'm going to give you 5 minutes individually, so right until the top of the hour, and then we're going to break you out in groups of 4, and you're going to have 15 minutes to share ideas, work together, see how you can help each other out. What questions do you have? And I know some people have to go. It's very late their time. That's fine. Thank you for joining us. We'll go ahead and take about 5 minutes to jot down some thoughts individually, and then we'll break you out into breakout groups. Yes, so absolutely, you can assign more than one domain to a person. They may have 2, 3, they may be high in all of them. Absolutely. I see a question in the chat, and I'm not sure, Maria Elena, I'm not sure I understand your question. Is an opposite for S?
I'm sorry, my English is not very good, but I hope you can understand me. I mean, for example, is there an opposite for attribute S or an opposite for F of they are individual, or a person can show both without to be opposite or so?
Yes. Okay. So no, there's no opposites of anything. You can be high in multiple domains. You can be high in S and in F. That means you have a high status orientation and a high fairness orientation. Yeah, there's sometimes people, there are certain ones where I think that people who are high in autonomy are not often high in relatedness, but it's not an opposite. And it could be situational where they're high in autonomy in their work, but they're high in relatedness in social settings.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Oh, and the fill in the blank on page 4 in the workbook was something that I talked about in early on. So that was a question that was asked. I'm going to actually repeat my what I said for those in case you want to fill them in the workbook. So S, status, is a sense of relative importance to others. C, certainty, is the ability to ascertain what the future holds. A, autonomy, provides a sense of control over events. R is relatedness, and I see Sarah's put these in the chat. Thank you very much, Sarah. Relatedness is a sense of connection and safety with others. And fairness is a perception of fair exchanges. And I'll type those into the chat as well, because we have about 1 more minute before breakout. I think I can quickly type those in. All right, let me just get these 2 typed in and then we will go into breakouts. Okay. All right, so we'll go ahead into breakouts for about 15 minutes, where you are going to talk about SCARF in your organization, see if you can help one another out, figure out, you know, how to motivate folks or how to work better with some of the folks, and we'll regroup in about 15 minutes. If you need us, please let us know and we'll come on in.
Allison, what would you like me to send to them in terms of a broadcast message for their prompt? Is it the final column piece?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of all of them, because I don't know how much they've worked on the whole thing. I mean, we don't have a ton of time, unfortunately, to really dig into it. But
sure.
I mean, I think kind of I don't know how much space you.
Not many characters, but I can send a couple of them.
Yeah. I mean, maybe just do that last one, you know, brainstorm how you can use their domains as motivators, which, you know, just put that, you know, brainstorm how you can,
sure.
or maybe we say, like, you know, determine which domains are their most prominent and brainstorm how you can use these as motivators. Something like that. I can put it in a chat if that's easier. You can just copy it.
Yeah, if you don't mind putting in the chat, that would.
Yeah.
I was trying to move someone and suddenly I put myself in the room by mistake.
Oh no!
And I was like, someone who knew. I have a couple people I just need to move really quick.
Okay, and I got a invitation again, but I declined. So
yeah, I put 6 people in all of the rooms just to try and pack them, so that way we can make sure we actually have enough people in there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Because like some still only have 2 or 3, because not everyone who's
right.
logged in is actually going.
And we lost some people with time and everything too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, looks like they're all good now. Yeah, we shouldn't have anybody in there or everyone that's in there should have at least 3 people, if not 4 in their sections, so.
I sent you the PDF, right, to send out, or no? I can't remember now.
Mm-hmm.
I did. Okay.
I have the PDF of the handout.
Let me PDF the slides and I'll send that to you too, because I'd like them, you know, they should probably have this. I don't want them to have the slides. Well, they can't have the slides because they're like ridiculously huge and it would kill everybody's email. So,
right.
So after we are done, I will PDF the slides and that'll be a lot smaller, and then you can just, and because that'll have some of the tips and tricks and things in there.
Perfect.
That can be a follow-up to this.
Yeah, because we do have, it's interesting in doing the breakout rooms, like I'm looking at some of the rooms and like one of them appears to have 9 people in it, but there's actually only 3 that are active. So it's 9 that are on the Zoom call, but only 3 of those within that 9 are actually active and accepted the join invitation. So.
Oh, yeah, well.
Gotcha. So we perhaps some people who are just kind of here listening in, which is fine.
Yeah. Well, that's all good.
It will all be great. I think we've had great numbers, so I'm excited.
Yeah. We've got some good participation too. I mean, it's hard with this big of a group, but definitely, people chatting in or talking. So it's as good as can be, hoped for given the venue.
Yeah.
So yeah. So about 10 minutes, we'll wrap it up, and we'll do a couple of aha moments and some questions, and call it a day. And then you and I can just chat briefly about tomorrow. And I want to rethink some of the breakouts, I think, for tomorrow. But maybe it'll work. I don't know. I have to think through it. I wanted to get through today and then kind of think about it. So.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I would guess we'll probably have similar numbers tomorrow. Yep. We definitely have a lot. I got bombarded with emails today saying there's no way I can make it, but I want the recording. So I think we're gonna have a ton of people who are interested in watching the recording afterwards. So that's good.
Yeah, sure. And you said you sent me a copy of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I know I'll have a few moments of like, oh, what was I doing?
Always. I hate watching myself on camera.
I don't love it either, but sort of a necessary evil. I did wear white though today, so I wouldn't like vanish into the background.
You do pop against the background. I appreciate that.
I have to wear the shirt tomorrow. So.
No worries. Yeah, the FiO background, when you look at it on the website, it's so much lighter. So I'm not sure why they did a darker background for Zoom, but whatever.
Yeah, it's when the ETD conference was a similar kind of thing. It was like a black with like a blue green kind of thing going through it, and and I originally had on a black shirt, and I was like, oh gosh. But we did our Mr. Rogers cardigans. We put on cardigans for that one because we just recorded that one. It wasn't a live session. It was recorded. So I had red and Stephanie had green. So instead it worked.
Nice.
Ultimately worked. So.
That's awesome.
Oh my gosh, I know.
One of the things that we might try, depending on the next time we do something together, there's a new software that our what are they? The student organizations are using. That's called Remo. I'm not sure if you've heard that one. It's similar in the idea of Zoom in that someone can be presenting, but the thing I like about it is you get designated and you can change people's statuses, but you designate people as presenter, and then they're the only one that's on the, it's kind of like speaker view in Zoom, but it's much more frozen. So like if you had a bunch of people join right now, you would see their video pop up. This is almost like freezing the main speaker on the page. But then they have all of these breakout tables. The visual of the software is that you're actually in a room and assigned to a table, and you can trade tables when you want to. If like table 1 has topic X and I want to talk about topic X, you can move to that table, but you can set up to I think there were 20 tables per floor and there were 10 floors you could do.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know how many people per table you could stack, but we tried it as a staff meeting when we did our all staff meeting this past time. And there were a couple of glitches with the software, but the idea of being able to do it that way was really cool. And I think it highlights the speakers a little bit better than Zoom does, and keeps away some of the distraction that sometimes happens on the chaos of Zoom. So we might look into doing that one as well.
Okay. I haven't even heard of that one yet, so learn something new.
Yeah, our student chapters started doing it. They just finished up the last 3 days before FiO started. They did the student leadership conference where we, if we had been in person, we would have flown in one person from every student chapter around the world to participate in an in-person 2-day leadership training kind of thing, and then they get to go to FiO as well. So they opened it up virtually to have at least 2 people per chapter be able to attend virtually. So there was a lot of people on Zoom over the last 48 hours for those sessions.
Yeah. You want to do a 5-minute?
Sure.
Cool. I just got a LinkedIn from someone in the session.
Yeah, our members are very active in terms of
That's
LinkedIn.
cool.
Yeah.
I'll accept that later. Or maybe 2. I see a couple of them in here.
I would not be surprised.
And I got a few private chats of people who had to leave, but were positive, positive feedback. They said.
Cool. Yeah, I realized I totally forgot to ask about a post-assessment. I'm going to tell them we'll send them something, but I haven't created it yet. So I didn't know if you had something you want me to send, or I can just create our general.
I didn't put anything together because I thought I actually thought you had said you were doing it. So
no, it's totally fine. I have our general, what did you learn kind of one. So I'll put that together and send that out to them. Probably with the video link in the next 48 hours. Sometimes Zoom comes back with the links really quickly, and sometimes it takes a lot longer to render the video.
Yeah, and I'll send the PDF too, and you can package it all up.
Great.
Yeah, and I'd love to get the feedback on that too. It's always helpful to me. So
yeah, so if any questions pop into your brain, I'll probably be making it tonight, tomorrow to send out sometime tomorrow or Wednesday for this session, and then probably Thursday or Friday for the Tuesday session.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I have certain stock questions that I sometimes use. I could send them. I mean, you can use them or not use them. I don't really have a preference one way or the other.
Okay, that's fine.
All right, why don't we do a 1 minute? Because then it'll be 1 minute and then 1 more minute for them to get out, and then we can close up shop here.
Okay, I just sent them the message, and Zoom is giving them the 50-second countdown at this point.
Yep,
so
that sounds good. Yeah, because it's 5:14, so that's perfect.
Okay, people should start popping back in a minute. All right, I think we are good to go.
Okay, great. I want to just take a couple of minutes to see if anybody had any aha moments or found the conversation with their breakout groups useful as they try to figure this out for their organization and their teams. I'd like to take just a couple of folks popcorn out, your thoughts either in chat or raise your hand and we'll unmute you. And then we can take some questions. First, let's get a few people, maybe 3 people who can share what this exercise was like for them, anything that was helpful for them, any aha moments, anything their team helped them to do. Interesting and helpful, good. I'm glad to hear that. And I know this is just the beginning. This isn't a finished product. It's something you can hopefully use going forward in your organizations and your personal lives. Any takeaways or any challenges in doing this, trying to figure out what domains? Is it easier to apply this approach to your junior staff than your senior staff? Not necessarily. I mean, I would say only in as much as you maybe have more access to your junior staff and you maybe have more ability to witness what they're doing than the senior staff. In that case, it might be easier to ascertain just because you're seeing more of their behavior and you can see, oh yeah, they're responding in a way that seems threatening, and maybe you don't notice it as much with the senior staff. But that would be my only comment there. Similar challenges in academia and manufacturing. Similar challenges, Scott. Similar challenges to just all of these domains, like moving towards and against, or what did you mean by your comment, Scott?
It was interesting. I mean, whether you're building a widget or reporting to a dean, getting things done is tough.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this is applicable. I see that, Maria Elena said it's even useful for the family, and it is. I use it with my kids. I should probably use it with them more, actually, because I am more accustomed to, oh, running low on battery. That's not a good sign. Make sure I plug in my PC. I'll die here. But in any event, it's always a good tool to use no matter what setting you're in. And I probably should use it more in my personal life than I do. I tend to see it through the professional lens, but it applies everywhere, really. Let's see.
Maybe let me follow up that question. Let me just follow up. Just a minute ago, I think that's a very good point, and really it's a great question set. How can we apply that to have things done, right? So I just want anyone, can you share with us that you apply this technique to have something done with this technique, and so we can use that example?
An example? I mean, in a workplace situation, in a personal situation? What were you looking for?
Right. Any situation, because
anything.
I think we always are facing a problem, how to make our team more productive. Always have an issue with that. So I think whether this technique can be used to inspire our team and to make them be more productive.
So what I would say, Min, is that I tend to get to, I observe the team and I would get to know sort of where they seem like they're responding well or not responding well, and I'd probably try some different things with them, and I'd probably have some conversations with them as well. So I was even thinking about this, in the context of some change work I was doing. I do some change management consulting, and I was working with a group that had a lot of changes going on, and one of the people in the team that I was working with, and these are folks who are actually supposed to be leading the change, sort of change champions in the group. And one of the folks was very, very concerned that if these changes went through in the organization, he would actually be demoted, and that he would have a different title and be demoted. And we talked a little bit about that, a little bit of a sort of a coaching kind of a conversation to try to find out, well, why did he feel that way? And of course, this person was high in a status orientation, and tried to figure out, well, if that did happen, because as it turned out, they were doing reorganization, and he might have actually been moved to having a different title. He would have been doing the same kinds of things. He would have stayed at the same, this was government work, he would have stayed at the same GS level in government work. So same level, different title and made him feel like he was being threatened. So we talked through what are some of the things that might help. You know, is there a new project, a new very prominent project you could do where you could be working on a detail. So he was going to go out of his usual work and work with a different part of the organization, but working with a very prominent member of the organization who saw him, you know, so who he had this access to somebody who was very senior. And that helped him a lot, even though he was worried that his title wouldn't be the same. It made him feel a lot better about some of the changes because he was doing something that would elevate his status in some way. And so I think it's just a matter of getting to know what each person values and how you're going to be able to help them along. So especially in a change initiative, someone high in certainty, really need to give them all the steps. Here's what's going to happen. Here's when we're going to communicate how this is going to impact our onboarding. Here's how it's going to impact our training. Here's how it's going to impact our budget. We need to give that person step by step and when they're going to know, you know, is your position going to be affected? I don't know right now, but I will know in a month from now. So I'm going to tell you on this date, and then you commit to that and you tell them on that date. So that even though they feel really uncertain right now, at least they know they have a date, you know, in mind when, okay, I'm going to feel better this date because I'm going to know what's going to happen. So those are some examples of how I've used it in teams in the past. Does that help a little bit? Does that answer your question a little bit, or do you need more?
Thank you.
Okay. We don't, yeah, really good. So, oh my goodness, I love these comments in the chat. We don't tend to observe our colleagues to really understand, you know, how they're motivated or what makes them tick. And then a follow-up comment of everybody is so busy and there's all this anxiety and fear, so there's rarely a chance to have an open discussion. That is so true. Absolutely true. We're running at, and this is something else with the brain that's really important to know, that our brains can go on overwhelm very, very quickly. And that amygdala hijack that we talked about, that fight or flight in the beginning, we can shut down. That going all the way back to the beginning in our saber-toothed tigers, that prefrontal cortex, that rational, logical thinking part of our brain, if we get into overwhelm, which we are in right now a lot, because we're so busy and there's so much anxiety and fear and we don't know what's going on, we're starting to shut down. And if we shut down, then we can't do this. We can't analyze and observe fairly because we're in fight or flight. So if you have to look at yourself first and understand what's making you tick and what's making you shut down, because if you're in that mode, you're not going to be able to do this activity. You're not going to be able to make the time to really observe colleagues and understand what's making them tick. So really good points that are coming up in the chat. And it's very difficult to do this. So I think it's, you know, making the time, and I'm so glad you all made the time today to work on this for 2.5 hours. It's a long time to really devote to this introspective work. It's self-awareness, it's emotional intelligence is really what it is. Becoming more aware of yourself, the diagnostic that we did, the thinking about, well, what really makes me tick, and then thinking about how that might apply to your team and your organization. We don't give ourselves this kind of time, and we're running 1,000,000 miles an hour and we're putting out the fires, and as a result, we're feeling threatened. Our brains are shrinking, our brains are on overload. We're in that fight or flight mode or freeze. We're not doing anything. We're just, you know, deer in the headlights. That is happening. That is real. That is really a fact of life right now. So I really appreciate folks bringing that up. And it's key to improving our relationships. Yeah, working from home has made it a lot more difficult to really discover and appreciate your colleagues. So what can we do to counteract that? I was on a call earlier today, a team building call with another group, and it's tough to do virtually, but everyone was on. They made the time. We had an 1.5 hours together. We talked about what we valued. We talked about how the values helped in our day-to-day. We talked about how the values contributed to the mission of this particular organization. And in doing so, folks started to get to know each other better. There were folks who had been hired during the pandemic. They have worked from home virtually the entire time. They have never met face-to-face with their colleagues. So what do? I mean, you can't go in, you can't sit down and meet face-to-face. So how do you leverage the technology that is available? I've done a ton of one-on-one video calls with folks, you know, just 15 minutes, just on a quick little Zoom or a FaceTime or a Skype, just to be able to see them and get to know who they are, especially if they're new to my organization or they're new to me as a colleague. It just helps a lot to see them, even if it's through a video screen. Yeah, and there are opportunities too. Thank you, Maria Elena, for pointing that out. You know, I also noticed that some of the folks I worked with earlier today said they felt a little more focused, and because they weren't commuting, they didn't have to deal with that anymore. They were able to really just, they knew they had limited time, so when they're working, they're uber focused, and they're using these technologies in new and different ways, and they're giving trust to folks. They're giving trust to their employees because, or their team rather, because they have to. Because if they don't, then everything is just going to fall apart. So instead of saying, oh my gosh, I have to get to know you and you have to earn my trust, they're giving their trust freely until they find out there's a reason that they can't trust somebody. And that's helping people a lot right now, is just being able to step out and be a little bit more trusting and say, okay, you know, I'm just going to go and just have a leap of faith and be trusting so that we can have those relationships we need and execute the things we need to and get things done that you know, meet our mission. Yeah, it's a challenging time for sure, but it's also good to take the time out to think about these things. And if you've got some time during the day to pull out the worksheet and just turn off everything else, turn off the emails and turn off the webcam just for a few minutes and be more introspective and think about the people on the team and what they do and what might motivate them. You know, give yourself that gift. Give yourself that gift of time. We don't have it, but if you can bite off a small piece, put it into your schedule, say, I'm going to take this half an hour to do it, that'll help you. So yeah, and thank you. Yeah, and the diagnostic again is just a little bit of a point in time to try to give you an assessment, but the cultural aspect of it may very well, they may have someone high in autonomy that doesn't come out high in that diagnostic. But knowing what you know now about them or about these different domains, that's a better litmus test, I think, than using the diagnostic. I would use your power of observation and what you think makes these folks tick and what makes yourself tick to really be able to understand how to motivate them and what might be threatening to them. So yes, we will be doing, we'll send out the recording, we'll send out a PDF of the slides and the handouts. Please feel free to reach out to me as well. My contact information will be in the slides that you get as well, and I think Sarah put it into the chat. But I think we've got just about a minute or two left, so I just want to thank everybody for participating today. And Sarah, any closing thoughts from your end?
I'd just like to reiterate thanking everyone for joining us today and sticking it out. We know doing a 2.5-hour training online is a long amount of time, but we thought the topic was worthwhile to do this, and hopefully we'll all be joining each other in person relatively soon. We will be taking the recording and sending it out to you all. Sometimes that takes about 48 hours to render through Zoom before we can send it out, but please be on the lookout for that. And as Allison said, please feel free to reach out to either one of us if you have any thoughts or feedback. We will be sending out a post-survey form as well. Thanks to everyone. I did also put a link. One of our participants had suggested a link thinking about how culture might play into this. So if you want to take a look at the chat box, there's a link there to an article that was given to us by one of our participants today. So thank you, everyone, and have a great night.
Thank you.